Welcome back to my channel. Ta-da! Things may look a little bit different because, you can see my face. And so I wanted to tell you a little bit about what's going on with me. I waltzed into the world a number of years ago on a warm and breezy August day. No one could have thought that that beautiful, bouncing baby girl with a head full of hair, her body might not work as well as it should. I have some health problems, and I've had them for a while. They've gotten worse over the last 10 years or so. Lungs, the lungs are not doing the thing that they need to be doing the best they can. It's unfortunate. So picture when you get a soft drink or soda or anything, I suppose, that you drink with a straw, when there's a hole in the straw above the liquid line. You are sucking as hard as you can to try to get the same amount of liquid. You're doing twice the amount of work to get the same amount of liquid. My lungs are the leaky straw of my body. They do twice the amount of work to get the same amount of air as everybody else has. And it's neat. I love that for me. So I also have a compromised immune system. With the two things, when they get together, they create a perfect environment for me to catch any cold or any virus that's going around, and for that to then turn into pneumonia. I have gotten pneumonia twice a year for the past 10-ish years or so. In fact, we like to joke that it is my biannual dance with death, which may seem a little dark and macabre to you. And if that's so, you're not going to like this channel from now on, because I'm pivoting into true crime. I know that's a weird change from nail polish, and hear me out. The reason is that because the different medications that I'm on and just the way that they affect my body, it makes my nails grow in kind of weak and peely and thin, and that can make it hard to grow them long enough for nail art. I have tiny, teeny, tiny little nail beds, which is a thing that you now know about me, and it's difficult to do nail art on teeny tiny little nail beds. You really need to grow them out at least a little bit to be able to paint them and do cute things. So that's why there's months in between a lot of my videos, because I've been sick. And also a lot of the medications that I take to keep me, alive, they make me awfully shaky and just my whole body vibrate in general. And that is also difficult to paint your nails with. So all that being said, I love making videos and I love true crime. So we are marrying the two together. That's what brings us together today, is true crime and videos. I'm not the first person ever to do this. I get it. But I wanna. I'm fascinated with true crime. Not only am I fascinated with the psychology of it all, but I'm also fascinated with the stories behind the victims and even the perpetrators. I think that the victim stories need to be told, and I feel like we can learn from things. I feel like we need to keep their stories alive so that we can learn from them and maybe prevent them, and also acknowledge the legacy they left behind, good or bad. So join me if you would like through this foray into true crimes. I also want to do other things on this channel. I want to do maybe movie reviews, funny movie reviews, and maybe some urban legends or myths, things like that. We'll see. We'll see how this goes. We'll see if I can handle it. But anyway, if you did not subscribe to this channel for true crime, you were here for the nail art only, I get it. We've come to a parting of the ways. I sincerely appreciate all the support you've given me this far, but I can't go on with that line of video because I just can't. It is just too hard for my physical condition at the moment. And also with lungs that don't work very well, breathing in the nail polish fumes, not that great. Can't do that for very long. It contributes to dying for me. I still love nail polish. I still love nail art. When I am feeling up to it and feeling healthy, I may still upload those sorts of tutorials, but we'll see. I don't know. I can't promise anything. Don't make me try to promise things, so I'm not a liar. I'm not lying. Today I will not lie. Tomorrow I might, but today I'm not. So that being said, if you decide to continue with me on this true crime journey, then buckle up, because we have a story for you today. There's also something else you should probably know about me. I don't do things ever the easy way. So when I research when I'm researching these stories, and believe it or not, this is actually the third case I've started researching in an attempt to make my first true crime video. I want to do the case justice, okay? It's not just entertainment, it's a learning experience. Telling the details is an important part of telling any story. I'm a storyteller. In fact, I'm an author. About 3 months ago, I dropped the first book in a series that I've been writing called Killing Time, a Blair McDaniels story. And this follows a woman, Blair McDaniels, who wakes up to find that her husband and daughter had been murdered while she slept. And she is then arrested and charged and found guilty for their murders. She is then executed, except she wakes up 2 weeks later on her own grave with a strange new power to be able to travel back in time and stop crimes before they start. She can't travel back to the day that her family is killed. That is just stuck for her. She cannot do that. She just can't do that. It's a stuck, fixed time on her timeline. She can't do it. So she's hoping that if she goes back and stops various crimes from happening, tangentially, she may be able to find the person who murdered her family and prevent it from happening altogether. So like I said, this is the first book in the series, and it's available on Amazon. I'll leave a link in the description box down below. But I'm a storyteller, and I'm also an INFJ. Is that what it is? My friend had me take a personality test this last weekend. I found out that I'm an INFJ, which apparently is the rarest of the personalities because we are literally a walking contradiction. So that's neat. Love that for me. And I found out, so I'm an advocate, right? And it says specifically in the information about this kind of personality that we really dig the whole idea of justice and morality, and we have high standards, and that's true. It's so true. So I love me a good vigilante fantasy. Vigilantasy. There we go. That's electric. I love myself a good vigilante fantasy. A vigilantasy. Copyright. Patent pending. I love that. It's the angry justice face, on like in movies where the person has just been knocked down too many times and you pissed them off. It's personal now. So they're standing up and they're not taking this anymore, and they're just gonna rain hell down upon you and all of your little criminal cohorts. I love that. That's my favorite thing. And so of course I'm writing this story about a vigilantasy from now on. Vigilantasy. And that just makes sense that I would be drawn also to the case that we're going to focus on today. Benjamin Franklin published a book called Poor Richard's Almanac in 1732 as a way to promote his printing business. In 1735, when that issue came out, Benjamin Franklin said, 3 may keep a secret if 2 of them are dead. And if you just had the Pretty Little Liars theme song go through your head, comment down below, because all the time. And for the most part, I would argue that holds true, unless you are a resident of Skidmore, Missouri, in the year of 1981. Today, we're going to talk about the story of Ken Rex McElroy. Are you familiar? So Skidmore is a tiny farming town in the very northwest corner of Missouri, close to the Kansas line. At the time, its population had it at about 430, and the 2020 census put the population at 253. So it's always been a small town, and it's getting smaller. It's getting tinier. It's not growing up. It's growing smaller like Benjamin Button. I've never actually seen that movie, so I don't know if that was an apt comparison. You'll have to let me know, but be nice about it, because I can't see every movie. I'm sensitive. Anthony Wyatt McElbourne. I keep wanting to say Macklemore. It's not Macklemore. It's McElroy, okay? There's no thrift store here. There might be. Actually, I don't know. I'm not actually that familiar with the makeup of Skidmore, Missouri. There may be a thrift store. I don't think there was in 1981. I can't be certain. Maybe there was a thrift store. Maybe Macklemore would have liked it there. But today we're talking about the McElroys. So don't get confused, because that was your fault. Anthony Wyatt McElroy was born on August 27th, 1890, to Jack and Mary Jane McLemore in Shelton, Missouri. I couldn't find much about his childhood, but there's lots written about him as an adult. He was loud and boisterous, and even more so when he was drunk, which was a lot of the time. He made moonshine. He was a mean drunk. He made his living hauling things for farmers around town in his wagon with his horses. And he actually owned a nice setup, a nice wagon, and some nice horses. I actually don't know what differentiates nice horses from all the other kind. Maybe they're bigger. Maybe they're taller. Maybe they cost more money. They can probably run for longer. I've only ridden a horse a handful of times, which, side note, I am kind of a country-ish, redneck-ish type of person, and my husband really is even more so. So one day we will own horses, and I will have to find a book to read or watch some YouTube videos on that sort of thing so that I know how to tell a nice horse from a not nice horse. Maybe they have a sign. He also made moonshine, and when he wasn't hauling things, he was working for the county, cutting ditches and scraping roadbeds. Again, the cutting ditches I can picture. Scraping, maybe he was leveling it. That was probably, yeah, I think that was probably what it is. Now, Mabel Marie Lister was born on February 28th, 1897, and she was the third of 5 children to Oliver and Isabel Lister. Mabel's parents were good, honest people, but they were tenant farmers, which meant that they didn't own the land that they farmed. They were hired by the landowners to live there on the land in a shack, usually without running water or electricity. And they were hired for the season or for the month or for the year, just short periods of time. So they moved around from farm to farm, ranch to ranch, farming the land that they didn't own as an attempt to get by. They made barely $30 a month doing this. And in today's currency, that's about $980 a month, which can't even have an apartment for that. Makes me sad. The world makes me sad. So in the hierarchy of farming communities, tenant farmers were down near the bottom. Rich farmers who either owned all their own land or very nearly owned all of their own land were at the very top. Under them were the yeoman farmers. They usually had a couple of 100 acres and some kids, and they usually could make it from one year to the next, but sometimes they couldn't. Under the yeoman farmers were the tenant farmers or the sharecroppers and the renters. So they farmed other people's land in exchange for a portion of the crops or a payment, and it was not a desirable position. And finally, at the bottom of the rung of hierarchy in the farming communities were the lowlives. And this is not my words. There was a book written about Ken Rex McElroy and this entire situation by Henry MacLean, and it was called In Broad Daylight. Now, I highly recommend listening to it. I actually got it on Audible, not sponsored, but Audible hit me up. And I listened to it. It was like 14 hours, and I also got the ebook because I wanted to be able to look up facts as I wrote the information down for this video. And if you can handle some F-bombs and some other distasteful things, you might like the book. I highly recommend it if you're able to tolerate those things. It is highly illuminating about the amount of damage that one man could do to a town with his emotional terrorism. I also watched the series on SundanceNow called No One Saw a Thing, and that is also, it is gritty, but I really enjoyed watching it. They have actual interviews with the town folks, some of the people who were directly involved in the situation we're going to talk about. And it was very well done. I recommend it. Like I said, it's about 6 45-minute episodes, and it goes by really fast. I kind of wish that I had watched the miniseries No One Saw a Thing before I had listened to / read the book In Broad Daylight, because I found things out about certain players in the story that made me deeply dislike them when I watched the miniseries. And I kind of wish that I had been able to go into the miniseries and these various interviews with an open mind instead of already having formed an opinion about a lot of these players, these residents of this town. I went in hating them. The hate was strong, and it did not get any weaker throughout the entire miniseries. You hate to see it. Anyway, back to Mabel and Tony. So these, as I'm sure you can figure out, were Ken Rex McElroy's parents. Mabel came from poverty, with her parents being the tenant farmers, and Tony, he was fairly well off with his own business. I don't know much about his parents. And they met and married on June 6th, 1910. Yes, for those of you who can math real good, that made Mabel only 14 when she married the 20-year-old Tony. And unfortunately, that is going to become a theme in this story. I hate to say that. It makes me want to barf. I have nieces and nephews. 14 is still a child. My goodness, I can't. Irritates me. Nevertheless, in June of 1910, Mabel, 14, and Tony's 20 years old, got married. Mabel gave birth to their first child, a boy named Herschel. That always makes me think of Krusty from The Simpsons. Herschel Kristofsky. Yeah. Anyway, on February 26th, 1911, just 2 days before she turned 15, so she was really getting up there in age. And speaking of 15, Ken Rex McElroy was the 15th child of 16 born to Mabel and Tony. They lost a set of twins, but they had 14 healthy children that they raised. They were 7 girls and 7 boys, spaced equally over the course of 28 years. Mabel was pregnant or giving birth or nursing a newborn for 28 years. No, I have 1 kid. I have 1 kid. I would have liked to have more. It's fine. But I have 1 kid. I cannot imagine being pregnant and giving birth in the 1910s, 1915 time area. Giving birth, oh my gosh, through the 1920s and the 1930s on a farm, giving birth to 16 different children. Oh my gosh, kill me now. No. Mabel handled it like a champ, apparently, because she was raised that way. Literally, she was a child when she started having children, and she was raised to keep having children with Tony. So, their 15th of 16 children was Ken Rex McElroy, born on June 1st, 1934. He had only 1 sibling after him, and that was a boy named Timmy. Ken was about what you would expect coming from a family with a gazillion kids, a poor farming family in a small town. He was very clearly and openly not Tony's favorite child. Tony favored Timmy, and he was open about it. In fact, years later, when Tony was speaking to the banker of Skidmore, Missouri, he gave him a list of which of his children were okay and which he should stay away from and not talk to. And which list do you think that Ken was on? Definitely on the second list, because why else are we here? So in the mid-1940s, after Mabel had done her 28 years of childbearing, they bought an old farmhouse in 175 acres on Valley Road in Skidmore, Missouri. And at one point, there were 18 people living in this tiny 2-bedroom house. 18 people. Some of the kids had grown up, gotten married, and moved back in with their parents into this 2-bedroom house because they felt like that was a good life choice. So it was Ken and Timmy and 2 other boys in 1 bed. That sounds cozy. So Ken's life growing up was unremarkable for a boy who was being raised in an abusive family. Tony often used anger and yelling as a way to discipline his children. It didn't really do any good with Ken, though, and Tony kind of gave up and stopped really even paying attention to Ken. So by 8th grade, Ken did pretty much whatever he wanted. Even his own family, his own siblings would kind of steer clear of him. His older sister, Dorothy, was really the only one who seemed to care about him. Everyone else left him alone. He would ice skate in the winter on his way to school, and he would check his traps for a possum or coon or beaver or skunk so that he could earn some extra money selling the fur. He would often show up to school smelling like a skunk, terribly like a skunk. And his teacher, who was quite the strict disciplinarian, would take him into the basement of the school and attempt to scrub the smell off of him. He never played with the other kids after school. He would go and run his dogs and check his trap line. Ken Rex McElroy always loved dogs, and he always had an affinity for them. The dogs seemed to love him back. He could handle the dogs in a way that no one else could. So he was a handful from the beginning. I don't know exactly where his anger came from, although it probably wasn't not his dad. You know, anger generally goes from generation to generation. As you treat your children with anger, they grow up and they are angry. It's a cycle. It's a cycle. Break the cycle. So he was unruly, and he was a big kid. So because he was a big kid, he was unruly. His teacher couldn't discipline him, and he didn't ever do his work, and he was always truant. So he actually repeated the 5th grade twice, which then meant that his younger brother Timmy caught up with him in school. He was quite clearly larger than the other 5th graders because he should have been in 7th grade, but he couldn't read or write. He didn't go to school, and he always said that nobody could tell him what to do, which I get to a certain point. I'm a little bit difficult to get along with sometimes. I get it. I had artistic differences with a lot of my high school teachers. It is what it is. But he was dangerous. His teacher literally could not handle him. In fact, on the first day that Ken Rex McElroy ever rode the school bus to school, he got in a fight, some sort of physical scuffle with some other children, and he and an older brother of his pulled knives on the other children in the fight, which is a thing that you can't do. Don't be doing that. So the children on the bus and in his class learned real quick, you don't mess with the McElroys, especially Ken Rex. He got all of the space that he wanted after that. If he sat in the front of the bus, the rest of the kids sat in the back. So when he was a child, he was caught stealing from the gas station and grocery store in Graham. The shopkeeper caught him and his buddy. It may have been his buddies or his brothers, I can't remember. But it caught him, was not happy, and threw him out on his ear. Later in the day, Tony, like the stellar, outstanding father that he was, came storming into the shop with a long, curved hunting knife and held it to the throat of the shopkeeper and said, "If you ever touch my boy again, I'll cut your heart out." That's quality parenting. That seems like a very healthy way to react to your child turning into a thief. I'm not here to judge, but I'm judging. Finally, his teachers passed him on to junior high, even though he couldn't read or write. They could not handle him anymore. He was getting physically too big. He was becoming a danger to those around them and his teacher and everybody. He didn't help with the farm chores. He didn't do anything anyone ever told him to do. And he thought he had access to pretty much everybody's lands. So in a farming community, it is, or at least it was, and in my experience, it is generally the rule that you ask permission to use or cross other people's lands. Generally, it's usually not a big deal because you're on good terms with your farming community neighbors. But Ken Rex McElroy thought that the rules didn't apply to him. No one could tell him what to do. He roamed on other people's land with impunity. He would ride his horse through other people's fields. He would take his dogs through other people's fields. In fact, one time, he even cut the barbed wire fence on someone else's field so he could get his horse and or dogs through. The farmer caught him and called him up on it. And Ken McElroy snarled at this farmer that no one could tell him what to do. And this farmer backed off. Ken was 14. So he taught the townsfolk early to handle him with kid gloves. He had an anger problem. He was angry. Toward the end of 8th grade, the school bus driver stopped by the McElroy place one day, and then 2 days, and 4 or 5 days went by, stopping by, and Ken was never there to get on the bus. A sibling would run out and say Ken wasn't going to school that day. Well, about on the 5th day, Ken's sister ran out and told the school bus driver that he didn't need to bother coming back anymore because Ken, he wasn't going to do school anymore. Which, can you imagine being in 8th grade? Of course, let's see, how old are you in 8th grade? Like 13 turning 14, right? So he was probably 15 turning 16. So yeah, he decided he was going to strike out on his own and be a man. And the school really wasn't sorry to see him go. So when he wasn't angry and hollering at people not to tell him what to do, he was fairly soft-spoken. And the kids and the teachers in the school don't remember any incidents of Ken actually beating someone up because he didn't really have to. He had established a reputation for himself long before that. So because he wandered at his own free will on everybody's land, he knew every nook and cranny. And he actually made a friend when he was a child named John L. Now, John and Ken were cut from the same cloth, right? John would keep a lookout while Ken would take a girl into the bushes and remove her clothes and do something to her, John was never certain what, and then bring her back out. So they were crap together. Together they were one crap sandwich. In 2nd grade, though, John moved away, and Ken didn't see him again until John moved back several years later. In the 8th grade, John and Ken would wear their hair slicked back in the 1950s style. They would roll their shirt sleeves up, and they would sit next to each other in school until the teacher finally split them for disrupting the class too much. When they weren't hunting or riding around on their horses on other people's land, they were driving over to girls' houses. And obviously, as you can probably understand, most parents of the girls in the town didn't like John or Ken Rex. They didn't want them seeing their daughters. But for some reason, and I will never understand why this is, girls were attracted to them. They were attracted to that broken, dysfunctional, bad boy sort of image. So Ken Rex McElroy never had any shortage of ladies. In fact, it was the exact opposite. He always had a handful of ladies he was juggling at any given time, even when he was married, which he was 4 different times. One girl, in fact, used to sneak out at night and meet him in the timber by her house, where they could canoodle together, I suppose. John would go visit Ken at his house, and John always felt bad for Mabel, Ken's mother, because she seemed to be cleaning, cooking, washing clothes all day, every day. She worked hard all the time and couldn't even barely stay even with things. She never had a new dress or anything for herself. All of her energy went into taking care of that small army that she had birthed. And her husband. Ken also stayed at John's house a few times, and he was always well-behaved, respectful, mild-mannered, and polite to John's parents. So after the bus driver was told that Ken Rex would not be going to school anymore, he didn't actually bring the bus back around until years later when he would pick up Ken's own children for school. But that's skipping ahead in the story. So as you'll recall, Ken quit school in the 8th grade, just decided he was done. His friend John continued until a little bit in the 9th grade, but then he hit the principal, which is a thing you can't do, so he was kicked out. Ken and John had always sort of been little thieves, but now they kicked it up into 5th gear. Stealing was their livelihood. Ken had acquired himself a 1936 Ford that needed parts and gas. And get a job? That's crazy talk. Let's steal stuff. That's the way. That is my job. Stealing is my job. So they took out the back seat of his truck and they lined that area with plywood so that at night they could drive out to other people's farms and scoop grain directly from the farmer's grain silo into his truck, take it to the grain elevator the next day, and sell it for a profit. No questions asked. And sometimes while they were cruising around, I don't know, looking for girls and debauchery and whatnot, they would see tractors or trucks that were sitting in other farmers' fields, and they'd come back later that night and siphon the gas out of it. When the transmission in Ken's truck went out, they looked around surreptitiously until they found a truck, another 1936 truck, sitting in a farmyard that belonged to a different farmer. So they waited until the farmer was gone for the weekend, and then they slipped through his fields, and they removed the transmission in little more than an hour. And they took it back to the farm, and they had it installed in Ken's truck by dinner time. And everyone was too afraid of the McElroys with their violent outbursts of temper to do anything. Now, Ken never really cared for work. He did try. He and John got a job at a nursery when they were about 15, but he was fired not long after because he was canoodling with a young girl who also worked there. Now, it was clear to most people that Ken never got over the fact that he was poor. And he clearly resented people, especially the rich farmers. They had money, they had new clothes, they had good cars, and he could never bring himself to do the work that they felt. Oh, look at that. Oh, but what does it mean? They could never bring themselves to do the things that they felt these farmers thought were beneath them, so they were hiring it out. I guess he's never heard of delegation as a way to, manage your affairs and earn money. So there's that. So, in 1952, when Ken was 18, he got married to a 16-year-old. See, I told you this was going to become a theme. And it only gets worse, and it only gets more disgusting. He got married to a 16-year-old girl named Olita from St. Joseph, Missouri. They called it St. Joe. And soon after their marriage, they moved to Denver because that's where one of Ken's sisters lived. And her husband was a construction foreman. And Ken and Olita thought that maybe he could get Ken a job, which he did. So they stayed in Denver for about 6 months while Ken worked on this construction site with his brother-in-law. And unfortunately, Olita got pregnant and then gave birth to a stillborn baby. One day, as Ken was working on the construction site, a cribbing form, which I'll put an image of it in right now, fell from about 30 feet directly onto his noggin, and it split his protective helmet in half and cut his scalp and split his skull. And the accident jammed the nerves and the muscles in his neck, which would cause headaches, periodic episodes of severe pain, and blackouts throughout the rest of his life. And he told people that the injury made him have to get a steel plate in his head, which we'll talk more about that later. And a lot of people would attribute his subsequent violent and irrational behavior to this head injury, but he was a jerk before he got his noggin cracked. So some people are just jerks. There's not always a reason. They're just turds. So this job in Colorado was Ken's last attempt to fit into the normal, quote-unquote, normal working world. In 1955 or 1956, he and Olita moved back to Skidmore, Missouri. I love saying that, to Missouri. And he initially centered his activity in St. Joe. It didn't take long for him, though, to expand his little criminal empire, his little criminal operation, to the entire 6-county area of northwest Missouri. He had never really been punished for any of the crap that he had done, right? Stealing was a lot easier than actually working hard for your money, and there were no consequences. No one was going to do anything to him. So why would he not? So he would start off small, stealing a hog or a calf at a time. He was not unintelligent, despite the fact that he couldn't read or write. He rigged a toggle switch in his Ford truck that would flip off the running lights so that he could sneak and creep around other people's land without them knowing he's there. He lined the back of his pickup truck with plywood so that he could drive around, and he would keep an eye out looking for nice fat hogs or calves that he could come back later by cover of darkness and steal. He would also note the location of all the gates and the easiest way in. So he would dress in dark clothes, he would sneak onto the land, he would get the cow, the calf, or the hog that he wanted, and he would lead it by the tail, which that just sounds hurtful, and lead it through the gate if the gate was close enough. Otherwise, he would just heft those like 250-pound animals under his arms and carry them to his truck. So with the back of his truck weighted down with the weight of this stolen animal, he would drive to another farmer's house and sell this animal usually for $50 or $60, which again, at the time, that was good money. If you remember Mabel's parents, and again, I mean, this was when Mabel was growing up, but they were making barely $30 a month. And Ken would get $50 or $60 per animal. And if the job went smoothly enough, sometimes Ken would go back to that same farm and steal another hog, or maybe even a third. And he had done this with his buddy John, but John had joined the Navy, but now he was out. He joined the Navy when he was 17, but now he was out. So he tracked Ken down to a squalid apartment to see if maybe they wanted to continue their criminal partnership. He found Ken living in a squalid, rundown little flat in St. Joe with a woman who wouldn't even get out of bed for the visit. And Ken was very clearly embarrassed by his situation. He felt like he had a long way to go and a lot of stuff to steal if he was ever going to hold his head up around the rich farmers of Nottoway County. However, up north, around Skidmore and the surrounding towns, his legend was growing by the day. So people would whisper about him and the various misdeeds that were attributed to him. There's not actually a lot known. He was accused of R-wording 14-year-old girl who then died giving birth to his twins, and allegedly a year later he R-worded her sister, who then married one of his best friends, but I couldn't find any corroboration for that. What was known, though, was that he liked to drink, and he liked the women, and the things that he did with the women, and he also liked to beat people, man or woman. So now we have reached Ken Rex McElroy's adulthood. He never picked on people who actually had money for lawyers, like the rich farmers. He picked on the poor people who had no recourse. So it seems like he is unstoppable. So as we reach Ken's adulthood, his rap sheet only continues to grow. That's where we're going to leave it for this video. This is such a long story that I'm going to have to split it into probably 2, maybe 3 videos, because I really want to get the information in there. And actually, the thing about Skidmore, Missouri, is that a lot of crazy things happened there before and after the incident involving Ken McElroy. So I thought maybe I would do a deep dive into small towns in Skidmore, Missouri in particular. But that won't be for a while until I finish Ken's videos. So if you found this interesting, don't forget to subscribe, like it if you liked it, share it because we all were raised that sharing is caring. I'll be back with the next installment of Ken Rex McElroy's story as soon as I can. I hope that you are having a great day. Don't do stupid things. It's really not that hard to not be a dick, and I'll see you next time.